And to set an agenda based on risks, you have to know them. And to know them, you have to understand your business. This has become a little bit of a cliche. So, I don't want to sound like, every single article or blog post that you might have seen about this, but, as the GC of the company, you really have to know how and why the business works. And this means the strategy of the company. It means the market. It means where your client fits into the market. And maybe even most importantly, the actual operations of your company. Like how are the teams set up? Who does what? Who's responsible for what? Where are the handoffs? Where do things go wrong? And I think if you can't hold your own in a discussion with the senior leadership team about these subjects, about, are we going to pivot left or are we going to pivot right? Are we going to make this investment or that investment? That I don't think that you're thinking deeply enough about the company to well inform the legal function. And this goes right back to what I mentioned about agenda setting. In order to set that agenda, you have to know where the risks are, and you have to understand the business to know where the risks are. So these things talk to each other. By knowing what the strategic goals of the company are, by knowing what your CEO, your CFO is telling your board about where the company is going and what the priorities are, you will be able then to say, gee, on this particular deal that I'm working on or that my team is working on, I know that this is so critical to our company strategy, because if it doesn't land, then we're not going to be able to hit that quarterly goal that we've set out for ourselves. So as a result, I'm going to be willing to take more risks to get this deal done than I would if it were something that were just ancillary to our development as a company. I think that's a kind of thought process that a GC ought to be engaging in every day. And you ought to be imparting that to lawyers that work with you to deploy that similar framework and help guide their own decision-making about the day-to-day work that they do. And I mentioned knowing the market. I want to talk about a discrete thing that I have had happen to me, and I think is something that's probably happened to a lot of people that are dialing in right now. That goes to this question about knowing the business and knowing the market. And the fact that it's such a bad feeling when it happens tells you how important it is to really, invest time in this development for yourself. One of the worst feelings that I've ever had as a GC giving guidance, or even as an in-house lawyer, is giving my view about a subject and then immediately having the business person, all the way up to the CEO say, well, our two primary competitors actually don't do it that way. They do the opposite, the thing that you're telling me that we can't do or we shouldn't do. I've been surprised to learn that our competitors do something different than what we're doing, and I didn't know that. And I think that that's something that we have to be able to know as GCs, and we have to ask questions about what the market does in order to calibrate our own legal guidance. We talked about understanding the business, and I want to talk about why the mindset change as a GC when it comes to understanding the business is a really radical one relative to being an in-house lawyer in another context. The way that you use legal analysis as any in-house lawyer very often is as your output. You're doing the research, you're trying to understand what the statutory or regulatory basis for guidance that you're giving is, and then you're using that as the basis for communicating some guidance to a business client. I think as the GC, the legal analysis is really not an output. It's really just an input for a bigger picture risk evaluation or recommendation or guidance that you're giving to your client. And I think when you think about the legal analysis as an input, that forces you to look at a range of different market strategy risks that normally aren't the kinds of things that lawyers are trained to think about. But I think those things are really important to leveling up and being a trusted advisor and being more than kind of just quote unquote a lawyer, which we all hear every day of the week. As a GC, you're supposed to be. So if there's one thing that you take home from this, and this is something that I work with my team on all day long, and I push myself to also be better at, it's thinking about the legal analysis and the legal conclusions, not as the end point, but as the starting point for the guidance that you're going to give to your client.